In 1971, a wild man emerged from the shadows of the Guam jungle. It wasn't a legend, he wasn't a native. He was an American soldier who believed he was still fighting the Second World War long after its official end. That's exactly what you heard. While the entire world was moving forward, this man was still at WAR. What keeps someone fighting a battle that no longer exists? What is the limit of human loyalty? The story I'm going to share now will shake everything you think you know about commitment, survival, and sacrifice. Forget everything you've ever seen about military bravery. This soldier exceeded every imaginable limit of duty. While you slept in your comfortable bed, celebrated birthdays, built a life, this extraordinary man faced daily dangers in complete solitude, convinced that he was fulfilling a vital mission for his country. This is not just another war story. It's a brutal testimony to what happens when the mission becomes more important than reality itself. His mind was frozen in 1944, but the calendar kept moving forward relentlessly. Stop right now and try to imagine years and years without human contact, thousands of days of believing that at any moment you could be discovered, tortured, or killed, not knowing that the world was already at peace, no communication, no news of loved ones, just you, your mission, and the merciless jungle. While the Beatles made history, man reached the moon, and the world faced the Cold War, this soldier persisted in his solitary mission, oblivious to all these changes. He lost decades of technological advances, cultural transformations, and family moments because of a single decision made in the heat of a bombing raid. What happens to the mind of a man who sacrifices everything for something that no longer exists? How do we react when we discover that our greatest show of loyalty was, in fact, completely unnecessary? This soldier's story is not just about a lost soldier. It's about all of us and the invisible limits of our dedication. How far would you go for what you believe in? How long would you keep fighting when everyone has given up? He wasn't a superhero. He was an ordinary young man who enlisted to defend his country and ended up fighting the longest and loneliest war in modern history. A man who was loyal to the absurd. This is no ordinary story of heroism. It is a journey to the extremes of the human condition, an exploration of the limits of physical and mental endurance, and a profound questioning of the meaning of purpose and duty. This is not just another video about World War II. It's a deep dive into human psychology, the devastating power of isolation, and the fine line between heroic determination and destructive obsession. The story you are about to discover will challenge everything you think about loyalty, duty, and the price of never giving up. Prepare to meet the soldier who fought the longest and loneliest war in American history, a war that no longer existed, except in his own mind. And now, I will reveal this man's name and the shocking event that changed his destiny forever. A single explosion, a single decision that would transform an ordinary young soldier into one of the most extraordinary stories of survival ever told. Most people have never heard of this amazing story I'm about to share. Leave your like right now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these unbelievable stories that time almost erased. In 1971, something impossible happened deep in the jungle of Guam. A wild man emerged from the trees, his watchful eyes scanning the horizon like a cornered animal. Thin, covered in scars, and wielding a rusty rifle, he moved like someone who never stopped being in danger. This was not a native inhabitant of the island. This man was an American soldier who believed he was in the middle of World War II combat, long after the last shot had been fired. Imagine a warrior fighting with all his strength, a battle that no longer existed. A man who sacrificed everything, absolutely everything, for a mission that the world had already forgotten. What keeps someone stuck to a goal when even the reality around them has completely transformed? Does loyalty have limits? Can determination turn into obsession? Can duty be too costly? These are questions that this soldier's extraordinary story will make you confront in ways you never imagined. Prepare your mind for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about human survival, commitment, and purpose. This man not only survived in conditions that would kill any of us within weeks, he kept his mission alive for a period that seems impossible to believe. What would you do if you were all alone in enemy territory? How long would you hold your position before giving up? Days, weeks, months, maybe? This American soldier has held his ground for so long that the world around him has completely transformed without him even knowing it. This is not a story manufactured to thrill. It is a true story that tested the very limits of the human condition. A man who lived like a ghost between two worlds, the frozen world of war that existed only in his mind, and the real world that continued to evolve without him. What's most impressive is not just how long he spent in hiding, but how he kept his sanity, his determination, and his purpose intact while the rest of humanity moved on. While you lived your normal life, this soldier hid in the shadows, hunted to survive, and stood guard against an enemy that had long since surrendered. He was not a superhuman. He was an ordinary young man who found himself in extraordinary circumstances and made a decision that would forever change not only his destiny, but our understanding of the limits of human loyalty. War shapes men in unpredictable ways. Some break under pressure. Others find a determination that transcends any rational explanation. This soldier belongs to an entirely unique category, something we have rarely witnessed in human history. Someone who continued fighting even when there was no one else to fight against. The only real battle was against time, against oblivion, against reality itself. This story will make you question, is there something in your life that you would sacrifice absolutely everything for? Is there a cause for which you would give up entire decades, relationships, comfort, security? Because that's exactly what this man did. Jonathan Jack Miller wasn't born to make history. Coming from a simple farming family in New Mexico, he grew up like thousands of other young Americans of his time, working hard under the scorching sun, learning the value of daily effort, and dreaming of a better future than the arduous present he knew. His parents raised him with solid values, honesty, hard work, and unconditional love for the country. When he turned 19, the world was on fire. World War II consumed entire nations, and the United States was already deeply involved in the conflict. Jack, like many young men his age, felt the call of duty pulsing in his chest. While his friends debated what they would do with their lives, Jack had already made his decision. "I'm going to defend my country," he told his mother as he signed his enlistment papers. She didn't cry in front of him, saving her tears for the privacy of the night. Jack's gaze brimmed with youthful determination, but it hid that invisible tremor of fear that every honest man feels when facing the unknown. It was the look of someone who was sure of the path to follow, even without knowing where that path would lead. Military training transformed the young farmer into a disciplined soldier. Jack showed a special aptitude for communications, becoming a radio operator. His ability to remain calm in chaotic situations and his sharp memory made him perfect for the role. For a young man who had never left New Mexico, the idea of crossing the Pacific seemed both terrifying and exciting. The first few months in the Pacific were like an electric shock for Jack. The dense jungle, the suffocating heat, the torrential rains, the persistent insects, the constant state of alert. He maintained regular contact with his family through letters, always upbeat, always avoiding the darker details of the war. "I'm fine, don't worry about me," he wrote, even on days when fear consumed him inside. His superiors noted his unwavering dedication. Jack never complained, never questioned. Orders, never hesitated. "Miller is the kind of soldier you want by your side when things get tough," his commander once commented. He wasn't the strongest, nor the smartest, nor the most skilled, but there was something about him that inspired confidence, a solidity of character that was becoming increasingly rare, even among men trained for war. In his letters home, Jack mentioned plans for the future. He wanted to go back to New Mexico, maybe buy a piece of land, build a house with his own. Hands, find a good girl to marry. Simple dreams of a simple man, dreams that seemed distant but possible when the war ended. In one of the last letters his family received, he briefly mentioned a young nurse named Hannah he had met while on brief leave. "She has kind eyes," he wrote, "and doesn't mind when I talk about crops and cattle. Maybe when this is all over." The sentence was left unfinished, as if Jack didn't want to try his luck by dreaming too big in the midst of war. No one could have imagined that that unfinished sentence would be premonitory, that Jack's plans would be eternally suspended, like those words he never completed on paper. No one could have guessed that this young man with such ordinary dreams was about to embark on the most extraordinary and lonely journey a human being could face. Have you ever stopped to think about how a single moment can completely change the course of a life? How can a decision made in seconds echo for decades? The events that were about to unfold in Jack Miller's life would test not only his physical endurance but the very nature of human loyalty, taking it to extremes never before documented in military history. What kind of man abandons all his personal dreams in the name of duty? What inner strength allowed Jack to face what was coming? What part of your story resonates with you most? Share your reflection in the comments. June 12, 1944. A date that for the world represents just another day in the chronological line of the Second World War. For Jonathan Miller, it would be the day his time froze for nearly 3 decades. The air on the island of Guam was thick that morning, heavy with humidity, and a palpable tension that seemed to electrify every leaf of the tropical jungle. Jack woke up before dawn, as he always did. He checked his radio equipment with the meticulousness that had become his trademark. His companions were still asleep when he left to inspect the camp's perimeter, a personal ritual he performed every morning. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, painting the clouds with soft shades of orange and pink. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to admire the beauty of the sunrise, a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of war. Little did he know that it would be the last dawn of his life as he knew it until then. The first signal came as a distant, almost imperceptible hum. Jack frowned, his senses honed by months of combat, detecting the anomaly before his conscious mind could even process it. The buzzing quickly turned into a growing roar. Japanese planes, dozens of them, appearing like deadly insects on the horizon. AIR attack! The scream tore from his throat as he ran back to camp. Chaos ensued instantly. Soldiers running, officers shouting orders, the deafening sound of the first bombs falling nearby, making the earth itself shake. Tree! 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 Jack's world has turned into a symphony of destruction. The acrid smell of gunpowder and burning earth filled his lungs as he ran to his post, grabbing his radio equipment. His hands worked with automatic precision, establishing contact with Central Command as explosions shook the ground around him. Eagle Base, Falcon 7 here. We are under heavy attack. Coordinates 2475. We need immediate air support. I repeat, we need immediate air support. The answer came through with static. Retreat. Untenable position. Regroup in beware of, and then silence. A bomb landed too close, throwing Jack several meters. The radio equipment shattered against a tree. Jack's head was spinning. His ears were ringing. Blood was pouring from a deep gash in his forehead. Through blurred vision, he saw his companions running, scattering through the jungle. Someone shouted something about retreating and regrouping, but the words seemed distant, unreal. When he finally managed to stagger to his feet, the camp was in ruins. Fallen bodies, destroyed equipment, dense smoke obscuring vision. And for the first time since arriving in the Pacific, Jack Miller was completely alone. The jungle around him seemed suddenly foreign, threatening. Each shadow potentially hid Japanese soldiers. Every sound could be the harbinger of capture or death. With his heart hammering against his chest, Jack made the decision that would alter the course of his life. Go deeper into the jungle, find a safe place, hide, survive, and eventually reunite with his troops. What Jack couldn't know, as he crawled to the safety of the dense vegetation, was that he would never see another American soldier again for nearly 3 decades, that the order to retreat that he had partially heard on the radio would be the last official communication he would receive, that while he hid, the war would continue for another year, and then it would end, that the whole world would move on while he remained stuck in that moment, that day, fighting a war that no longer existed. The hours turned into days. Jack moved only at night, avoiding any contact, any exposure. Every noise made him freeze. Every plane in the sky sent him diving into makeshift hiding places. He was disconnected, isolated, lost not just in the island's geography, but in time itself. What goes on in the mind of a man completely alone, surrounded by invisible dangers? What inner strength allows him to maintain his sanity when his only companion is constant fear? Jack Miller was about to embark on the most extraordinary journey of survival ever recorded, an odyssey of isolation that would test not just his body, but his soul. The American military code is extremely clear about the procedures a soldier must follow when separated from his unit in hostile territory. If separated, seek to regroup with allied forces. If regrouping is impossible, avoid capture and survive until rescue. Simple, direct words, printed in manuals and repeated during training. Words that take on a completely different meaning when you're alone in the jungle, with the enemy, potentially around every corner. In the first few weeks after the bombing, Jack Miller tried desperately to follow protocol. It moved with extreme caution towards the pre-established meeting points, always alert for signs of an American presence. But each site was either empty or occupied by Japanese forces. Their attempts to establish contact through discreet signals or markings remained unanswered. Silence was his only company, interrupted only by the natural sounds of the jungle and the occasional distant roar of planes. It was during this early period that Jack began to face his first great psychological test, the relentless reality of absolute isolation. It wasn't just the physical loneliness, but the dawning realization that perhaps no one knew he was still alive, that maybe no one was looking for him, that perhaps he had been presumed dead, another name on the endless list of war casualties. And then came the crucial moment, the choice that would define the rest of his life. One night, hiding in a small natural cave, Jack heard voices nearby, American voices. For a moment, his heart soared with hope and relief. He was seconds away from revealing his position when he caught fragments of the conversation. The soldiers discussed an imminent withdrawal and mentioned the possibility of the island being lost to the Japanese. They talked about captured comrades, about compromised vital information. It was in that dark moment that Jack made his decision. A decision that some would call irrational, others heroic, and many would simply not understand. He would not reveal himself. Not only would he remain hidden, but he would deepen his isolation, because in his mind, shaped by duty and fierce loyalty, the equation was simple. If the island was potentially lost, if crucial information had been compromised by prisoners, then its capture would pose yet another risk to American efforts. "I will not be captured," he whispered to himself in the darkness of the jungle. "I will not betray my country. I will not abandon my mission." Simple words that carried the weight of an unbreakable oath. Words that would silently echo through the years, decades in which the world would completely change as Jack remained true to a promise he made to himself on that lonely night. It is difficult for us, sitting comfortably in our safe homes, to truly understand the mindset of a soldier isolated in enemy territory. The constant fear that becomes a familiar companion. The justified paranoia that turns every shadow into a threat. Determination that crystallizes into obsession. While you're deciding what to have for dinner tonight, Jack Miller was deciding daily between risky exposure or safe isolation. While you were planning your next vacation, he was planning alternative escape routes and hiding places. While you worry about promotions at work, he worried about the sound of your own breathing potentially attracting enemies. Jack's choice was not made in an emotional vacuum. It was taken in the context of a 20-year-old young man, trained to value his mission and his country above all, subjected to extreme conditions of stress and isolation. It was the decision of someone who, paradoxically, chose absolute solitude as the ultimate expression of connection with something greater than himself, his duty as an American soldier. What Jack could not predict is that his choice, made in a moment of crisis, would last 9,855 days, almost 3 decades, fighting a war that, for the rest of the world, was over, maintaining tireless vigilance against an enemy that had long since laid down its weapons. Jack Miller's story is not just about physical survival in harsh conditions. It's an in-depth study of how our choices, especially those made under extreme pressure, can completely define and redefine our lives, about how commitment to a cause can transcend any conventional logic. Imagine yourself making this choice. Imagine the weight of this decision that would last for days, weeks, months, and eventually years. What would be your limit? How long could you keep your mission alive before loneliness, fear, and doubt consumed you? What would you have done in his place? Share your honest opinion in the comments. Nature was not designed to accommodate isolated humans. Every aspect of the Guam jungle presented a deadly challenge to someone with no supplies, no support, no immediate hope of rescue. And yet, Jack Miller didn't just survive. He developed a system of living so sophisticated, it bordered on the unbelievable. His first big challenge was shelter. Using only a combat knife and a small shovel, improvised from metal salvaged from military wreckage, Jack methodically dug what would become his home for nearly 3 decades. It wasn't simply a hole in the ground. It was a masterpiece of intuitive engineering. An underground bunker, carefully reinforced with bamboo and braided roots, waterproofed with wide, overlapping sheets, ventilated through small openings, strategically placed to avoid detection. The entrance was a marvel of camouflage. Even from just a few steps away, the untrained eye would never notice the opening hidden beneath a seemingly natural formation of vegetation and rocks. Jack had created not just a hiding place, but an invisible fortress. Within this cramped but functional space, he maintained a military routine with obsessive precision. Waking up precisely at dawn, check the perimeter in increasingly larger concentric spirals, reposition traps for small animals, collect rainwater in carefully arranged concave sheets, only seek food in places where its presence would not be noticed, return before dark, reinforce camouflage, sleep lightly, always alert to any abnormal sounds. His original clothes wore out completely after the first few months. Jack adapted, creating rudimentary clothing from woven plant fibers and preserved pieces of his parachute. His feet, initially protected by military boots, eventually hardened to the point where he could walk over sharp rocks without apparent discomfort. His body, once robust and well-fed, became thin and fibrous, perfectly adapted to his new reality. Food was perhaps the most constant challenge. Jack learned through painful trial and error which plants were edible and which were poisonous. He developed hunting techniques so silent and efficient that he could capture birds with his bare hands. He discreetly cultivated small, camouflaged gardens in different parts of the forest, never large enough to attract attention, but enough to supplement his diet when game was scarce. But the most extraordinary aspect of his survival was not physical, it was psychological. Jack maintained a mental discipline that defied all expectations. The notebooks that were eventually discovered along with him told a fascinating story of psychological resilience. Dozens of them, filled out in his meticulous handwriting, recorded not only observations about enemy movements and contingency plans, but served as an anchor to his sanity. He created detailed maps of the island, carefully noting safe locations, water sources, plentiful hunting areas, territories frequented by patrols, which unbeknownst to him had ceased years before. He kept a daily record of the weather, the phases of the moon, the tides, developed elaborate strategies for hypothetical combat or rescue scenarios. Occasionally, when the weight of isolation threatened to crush his spirit, he wrote letters home, letters he knew would never be sent but which kept alive his connection to the world he had left behind. "Dear Mother," began one, dating from a time when her mother had already passed away more than a decade ago. "I remain well and hopeful. The war must be near its end. I dream of the day when I will return home and watch the sun set together over the hills of New Mexico." Even more impressive was how Jack interpreted the distant sounds of commercial airliners or the occasional fishing boat as evidence of continuing enemy activity. His brain, trapped in the reality of 1944, reinterpreted each stimulus to validate his continued mission. It wasn't delusion, it was a psychological survival mechanism as sophisticated as his underground bunker. Can you imagine such a level of commitment? The ability to keep not just the body alive, but the mission intact, when every human instinct cried out for connection, for surrender, for an end to suffering. Jack Miller didn't just survive, he remained a soldier, true to his duty even when there was no one to testify to his loyalty. As Jonathan Miller fought his private war deep in the jungles of Guam, the world beyond that Pacific island was transforming at breakneck speed. History did not stop to wait for a lost soldier. It has advanced mercilessly, rewriting borders, redefining alliances, revolutionizing the very nature of human existence. In August 1945, just a year after Jack separated from his unit, a light brighter than 1,000 suns illuminated the sky over Hiroshima. The atomic age was born in a mushroom of unprecedented destruction. Days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. Japan, the enemy Jack still believed he was fighting, surrendered unconditionally. World War II, the reason for his solitary mission, officially came to an end on September 2, 1945. While Jack stood guard against patrols that no longer existed, the world celebrated peace. Fireworks lit up the sky over New York. Soldiers returned to the arms of their families. Reconstruction began. Life moved on. In some military office, Sergeant Jonathan Miller's name was added to the never-ending list of missing in action, presumed dead. An official letter of condolence was sent to his family in New Mexico. His mother refused to believe it. For years, he kept his room exactly as he left it. "My Jack will come back," she insisted, even when neighbors and friends gently suggested she accept the reality. But time is ruthless even for maternal love. She passed away in 1955, taking to her grave the hope of seeing her son again. That same year, Jonathan Miller's name was officially transferred from the list of missing persons to the list of confirmed casualties. A solemn ceremony was held. A gold star was added to the family flag. The world officially declared Jack dead, while he remained desperately alive, fighting his private war. Hannah, the nurse with the kind eyes that Jack had mentioned in his last letter, waited for news for 2 years. Eventually accepting the cruel reality of war, she married a Pacific veteran. They had 3 children. The eldest was named Jonathan, a silent tribute to a love that never had a chance to blossom. The 1950s brought the Cold War, a new form of conflict that Jack could not even understand. The nuclear threat hung over the world like a constant shadow. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against the Axis, now faced each other through an ideological iron curtain. Korea became the new battleground, then Vietnam. American soldiers died in jungles, not unlike the one where Jack still stood guard against a long-defeated Japanese enemy. Culture was transforming at breakneck speed. Elvis Presley revolutionized music. Television invaded American homes. John F. Kennedy, young and charismatic, assumed the presidency, promising to put a man on the moon, a promise fulfilled in 1969, when Neil Armstrong took his one small step for a man, one giant leap for humanity. Meanwhile, Jack continued counting days in his notebook, calculating escape routes, meticulously recording sightings of enemy troops who were, in fact, tourists or locals. In 1963, Kennedy's assassination shook the world. Jack, completely isolated, had no idea that his supreme commander had fallen. Martin Luther King shared his dream for America and was later silenced by a murderous bullet. Youth rebelled, questioned authorities, protested against wars. Woodstock brought together 500,000 young people celebrating peace and music, while Jack, now almost 45, continued to wage war, his body aging prematurely from the extreme conditions, his mind still stuck on that fateful day in June 1944. Technology has advanced in quantum leaps. The first personal computer was being developed. Medicine achieved impressive victories against previously fatal diseases. The man dreamed of Mars, while Jack Miller dreamed only of surviving another day in the jungle that had become his home and his prison. Sometime in the 1960s, the Miller family's own small farm in New Mexico was sold. There was no one to keep her. The family name slowly disappeared from local conversations. Jack's memory became an increasingly distant echo. Only at a local war memorial did a small bronze plaque preserve his name, date of birth, and presumed death, along with the words, "Gave his life for freedom." The cruel irony of this inscription is that Jack had not given his life, at least not in the literal sense. He was still alive, breathing, surviving, but in a way he had sacrificed something equally precious, the right to live in the world he had helped to save. Every uncelebrated birthday, every Christmas without family, every medical advance that could have alleviated his physical suffering, every human connection denied, all these small deaths added up to a sacrifice perhaps greater than death in combat itself. There is something deeply moving in the image of this man, faithful to the absurd, persisting in his mission as the world he once knew disappeared like mist in the morning sun. How many of us would maintain that level of commitment? How many of us would endure absolute loneliness for a cause that, without us knowing, no longer existed? The world continued to spin without Jonathan Miller. Generations were born, grew up, and had their own children without ever hearing of the soldier lost in the jungle. And yet, her quiet story of unwavering loyalty perhaps has more to teach us about commitment and purpose than 1,000 modern self-help books. Can you imagine the shock Jack would feel upon discovering everything he lost over the years? What advancement or change in the world do you believe would be most difficult for him to understand? Share your thoughts in the comments. January 18th, 1971. An ordinary day for the rest of the world. A day that would change everything for Jonathan Miller. The sun was rising over Guam as it had done for more than 9,000 mornings since Jack had isolated himself in the jungle. On that particular morning, 2 local farmers, Pedro Santos and his son Miguel, entered a remote area of the forest in search of land to expand their fruit plantation. They chatted casually, their voices echoing through the trees louder than they should in a territory where a forgotten soldier lived in a state of perpetual vigilance. Father and son advanced slowly, cutting vegetation with machetes, measuring the quality of the soil, discussing plans for the future. They were completely oblivious to the fact that each step took them closer to an encounter with living history. "Stop! Identify yourself!" The hoarse cry in English cut through the morning air like a sharp blade. The words, spoken from a throat that rarely made sounds beyond whispers, had a harsh, almost inhuman quality. Pedro and Miguel froze instantly, terror running down their spines like electric current. 20 meters away, partially hidden among the dense vegetation, was a figure that seemed to have emerged directly from ancient nightmares. A man, or something that had once been a man, pointed a visibly rusty but unmistakably threatening rifle directly at them. His skeletal body was covered in rags that an attentive observer could, with difficulty, identify as the remains of a military uniform. His skin, exposed in several places, had the texture of tanned leather, marked by scars and sunburn, a scruffy grey. Beard reached almost his chest, but it was the eyes that truly told his story. Intensely blue, simultaneously wild and calculating, the eyes of a creature who had survived the unthinkable, who lived in a permanent state of predatory alert. Pedro, visibly shaking, raised his hands in a universal gesture of surrender. "Don't shoot," he said in halting English. "We are civilians, farmers, not soldiers." The wild man's eyes narrowed suspiciously. The rifle didn't lower even by a millimeter. "Japanese?" he asked, his voice so unaccustomed to speaking that each syllable seemed to cause physical pain. It was at this moment that Miguel realized the unimaginable. "American?" he asked, incredulity coloring his voice. "Are you American?" A long silence followed, as if the question had activated some protocol deeply buried in the man's mind. When he finally responded, it was with the rigid formality of someone reciting a mantra, repeated countless times over the years. "Sergeant Jonathan, Miller radio operator, 24th Infantry Division, United States Army." Pedro and Miguel exchanged astonished looks. The name meant nothing to them, but the situation was beginning to make terrible sense. Stories occasionally circulated about Japanese soldiers still hiding on remote islands, refusing to believe the war was over. But an American, it was something completely unexpected. "The war," Pedro said slowly, choosing each word with extreme care. "The war is over. It ended a long time ago." Jack didn't respond immediately. His rifle began to shake almost imperceptibly. "Japanese lie," he whispered, more to himself than to the two men. "It's not a lie," Miguel insisted gently. "The war ended in 1945. It's 1971. January 1971. The impact of these simple words was like a physical blow. Jack staggered slightly, as if he had been hit in the chest. The rifle lowered a few inches, not by conscious choice, but because his muscles suddenly lost strength. 1971, he repeated, his voice barely audible. 27 years? It was at this precise moment that something extraordinary happened. The hardened face of Sergeant Jonathan Miller, a man who had faced loneliness, hunger, fear, and hopelessness for nearly 3 decades without ever breaking, began to contort into an expression he himself would probably no longer recognize. His eyes watered, his dry lips trembled, and then, for the first time since that long-ago day in June 1944, America's most loyal soldier allowed himself to cry. They were not silent, contained tears. It was a visceral, primal cry, the lament of a man simultaneously confronting the magnitude of his sacrifice and the utter futility of it. The rifle fell to the forest floor as Jack covered his face with gnarled, calloused hands, his entire body shaking with sobs that came from the depths of his soul. Pedro and Miguel stood respectfully apart, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something deeply private and sacred, the moment when 27 years of lost history came crashing down on one man like an unrelenting avalanche. "He finished?" Jack finally asked, his voice cracking almost beyond recognition. "Is it really over? We won?" "Yes," replied Pedro softly. "The United States won. Japan surrendered in 1945 after atomic bombs were dropped on 2 cities. "Atomic bombs?" repeated Jack, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. Another technology, another historical event, another reality from which he had been excluded. In that moment, in the sun filtering through the canopy of the forest that had been his refuge and prison, Jonathan Miller finally understood the full truth of his situation. For 27 years, endless days and nights, he had remained faithful to a mission that no longer existed, loyal to a purpose that had been fulfilled while he stood guard against ghosts. Jonathan Miller's return to the world that had moved on without him was not accompanied by fanfare or grand celebrations. After the initial meeting with Pedro and Miguel Santos, Guam authorities were notified. A medical team, accompanied by American military officers stationed on the island, was sent to find him. They approached with extreme caution, fearful that the man might react violently or flee back into the jungle that had been his home for so long. They found him sitting quietly at the entrance to his meticulously constructed bunker, his rusty rifle propped uselessly against a nearby tree. His face, although still scarred from decades of exposure to the elements, had softened. The perpetual tension of survival that had defined every fiber of his being for 27 years was slowly beginning to dissipate, replaced by an expression that no one could fully interpret, a complex mix of relief, confusion, loss, and something that resembled grief. The initial medical examination revealed exactly what one would expect from someone who had survived in extreme conditions for so long. His body was malnourished, yet surprisingly functional. Scars from old wounds, many of them likely treated by his own hands with limited resources, marked his skin like a map of his lonely journey. His teeth had suffered, but less severely than one might imagine, thanks to his predominantly natural diet. His eyes, although still remarkably alert, showed signs of deterioration due to age and constant exposure to the tropical sun. More impressive than his physical state was his mental state. The military. Psychologists who evaluated him expected to find someone completely disconnected from reality, perhaps incapable of coherent communication after decades of isolation. Instead, they found a man whose mind remained remarkably organized and functional, although trapped in a reality that had ceased to exist decades earlier. The first few weeks after his rescue were dedicated to a careful reintroduction to the modern world. Each new piece of information, each revelation about the changes that had occurred during his absence, was potentially traumatic. The death of his mother, which occurred 16 years earlier, the sale of the family farm, the news that Hannah had gotten married and had a son named after her, the reality of nuclear weapons, the Cold War, Kennedy's assassination, the moon landing. Each new revelation was a small shock, a painful reminder of everything he had lost. News of his rescue spread quickly across the United States. The press clamored for exclusive interviews. Hollywood already envisioned a blockbuster based on his extraordinary story. The government considered decorations and honors. Substantial financial offers arrived daily for rights to his biography. Jack refused everything. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted on the rare occasions he spoke to military officials. "I just did my duty." When he finally returned to the United States, it was without ceremonies or receptions. He traveled discreetly to New Mexico, where he settled in a small, wooden house not far from where he had grown up. The house, purchased with the modest military pension he received retroactively for his years of service, became his new bunker, not against physical enemies, but against a world he found incomprehensible and overwhelmingly noisy after decades of jungle silence. Jack rarely went out. He rarely spoke to neighbors. He refused to use the telephone or watch television. His only regular visitors were military officers who checked on his well-being and, occasionally, a social worker assigned to help him with his transition. To most people in the small community, he was just the strange old man who lived as a recluse. Few knew his extraordinary story, and he preferred it that way. Only once, when a particularly persistent journalist arranged a brief interview, did Jack offer a glimpse into what was going on in his mind after everything he had experienced. "The hardest part wasn't surviving in the jungle. It was discovering that I'd sacrificed everything for a cause that had already been won. That while I watched shadows, the world moved on without me. That all those years, all those endless days of vigilance and fear, were completely unnecessary." There was a deeply tragic quality to these words, not just the lament for lost time, but the suggestion that his unwavering loyalty, his superhuman determination, his extraordinary resilience, all the qualities that made his story so remarkable, were ultimately wasted, a monument to the futility of human sacrifice when disconnected from its original purpose. Jack Miller passed away in 1979, just 8 years after his rescue, The official medical report cited heart failure as the cause of death, but those close to the case understood the more complex truth. His body, forced to function for decades under conditions of extreme stress and deprivation, had simply exhausted its ability to adapt. Like a machine continually operated beyond its specifications, it eventually gave way under the accumulated weight of the years. His funeral was small, discreet, exactly as he would have wanted. A handful of military officers attended. A young man in his early 20s, introduced only as Jonathan, stood silently in the back. Hannah's son, the namesake of a soldier her mother had briefly loved decades earlier. Jack's ashes were scattered over the hills of New Mexico, finally home, finally at peace. Jonathan Miller's story gradually faded from the headlines. New wars, new heroes, new tragedies occupied the public consciousness. Today, few know his name or his extraordinary journey, his unwavering loyalty, his unparalleled determination, his superhuman ability to persist when any reasonable person would have given up. All of these qualities now exist mainly as footnotes in specialized military history books, and perhaps that is where the real tragedy lies. Not just in the years Jack wasted in the wild, but in the fact that his story, this incredible demonstration of the limits of human commitment, serves as no inspiration or lesson for the generations that followed him. His life leaves us with a disturbing question. When does loyalty turn into obsession? When does duty become self-defeating? What is the real price of never ever giving up? And so we come to the end of this incredible and disturbing story of extreme loyalty. Jonathan Miller confronts us with a difficult truth about our own humanity. How far does our commitment to what we believe go? When does determination turn into prison? What defines the line between heroism and obsession? In a world where commitments are broken at the slightest obstacle, where promises last only until difficulties arise, Jack Miller represents the opposite end of the spectrum, a man who remained faithful to the point of absurdity, to the point where his loyalty transcended any logic or practical purpose. His story is not just about physical survival in impossible conditions, but about the survival of the human essence itself, when all that remains is purpose. This extraordinary story deserves to be known, shared, and preserved as a testament to what we are capable of, both greatness and tragedy. Every like and subscription to our channel helps rescue stories like Jack Miller's from oblivion, ensuring that sacrifices like his do not disappear in the shadows of time. What do you take from this story into your own life? What part of Jack Miller's journey most touched your heart or challenged your beliefs? Your unique perspective enriches our community and can illuminate aspects of this story that many have missed. Share in the comments the most valuable lesson you learned from this extraordinary saga of human resistance. And believe me, what you just learned is just the tip of the iceberg. An even more stunning revelation awaits you in the next video, something that will completely transform your understanding of the limits of human loyalty and the invisible price that many have paid in the wars that have shaped our world. Click now on the next video and discover what very few people in the world know about history's forgotten soldiers.